Manet was interested enough in Berthe to ask her to pose for him. He was so taken by the dark, intelligent, even mysterious look that Morisot gave him in The Balcony that he went on to make 13 more portraits of her. But Morisot was never alone with Manet. Through the many sittings, Berthe's mother was a constant chaperone. Madame Morisot was displeased that her daughter was not spending her time more wisely.
Berthe Morisot persisted long past the age when she should have given up painting and gotten married according to conventional standards of femininity. And she became a driven artist in a way that alarmed and saddened her mother.
Edma, though, succumbed to the pressure, and in March 1869, she married. With Edma gone, Berthe became filled with self-doubt.
Morisot was very tough on herself. She was never complacent. She was never satisfied. She was tormented in many ways. Somehow she'd internalized a kind of negative self-image. She wonders often whether she should give it up. At the point that her sister marries and has a baby, Morisot herself is tormented and says, "Should I give up painting too? Is it worth pursuing? It's such a struggle."
Dearest Edma, I'm sad. I feel lonely, disillusioned, and old. I've done absolutely nothing since you left, and this is beginning to distress me. My painting never seemed to me as bad as it has in recent days. The sight of these daubs nauseates me. Berthe.
Morisot suffered with what she called lamentation mania. For her, there were times when both art and life seemed too much to bear. Berthe Morisot struggled to pull herself from depression. Unmarried at the considerable age of 28, and her art career going nowhere, Morisot felt nothing but anguish. But early in the summer of 1869, she forced herself out of the house for a painting trip. She traveled over 500 kilometers to her sister Edma's house in Lorient, on the coast of Brittany. Once there, she was ready to paint. The trip would mark a new beginning for both Morisot and her art. Morisot was in a mood to experiment. She tried new techniques to portray light and brightness. She adopted a broader brushstroke. And she worked hard to portray a feeling of a moment captured. When she returned to Paris in September, she invited Manet over to see her harbor at Lorient. Manet couldn't quite understand why she'd left it in what he considered an unfinished state. But nonetheless, he liked it.
Manet looks at it and says, "I'd like to have that painting." And all of a sudden, Morisot thinks, oh, Manet, the great painter of his generation, he wants one of my pictures. And I think that was the moment at which she thinks to herself, yes, I am going to be also a great painter of my generation.
Not long after Morisot returned from Lorient, Monet and Renoir were preparing to go on a painting expedition of their own. It had taken them the entire summer to scrape together enough money to buy their painting supplies. Now, in early October, they were ready. They went across the river from Louveciennes to a nearby swimming area called La Grenouillère, the frog pond, and they began to experiment. Monet and Renoir wanted to capture the shimmer of water, reflection, movement, a fleeting impression. And to do so, they began using short strokes, commas, or dots. They left brush marks distinctly visible, and they paid close attention to the individual highlights of reflected color. Monet's and Renoir's experiments at La Grenouillère marked the debut of the Impressionist style.
There are many moments when one might say Impressionism came into this world, kicking, screaming, slightly messy. But certainly in the late 1860s, when Monet and Renoir were painting at La Grenouillère, in addition to turning to contemporary life, they wanted to literally be able to heighten the impact of their work through formal means, color, brushwork, novel compositions, and this was an absolutely calculated affair.
This idea of capturing the ephemeral, that modernity consists in pinning down what goes by so quickly, that modernity is captured in a minute, a second, a fraction of a second. This was part of the Impressionist impulse.
The Impressionist impulse was not just shared by Monet and Renoir, but by Morisot, Sisley, and Pissarro. They were creating art that captured the modern moment. But the art world was not at all prepared for such a break with the past. In the spring of 1870, Claude Monet decided he would challenge the Salon jury and submit his experimental work from La Grenouillère. Renoir opted to play it safe and chose more conservative paintings, The Bather and A Woman of Algeria. The jury accepted Renoir's work. Monet's was rejected. Monet did his best to put his disappointment and anger aside and focus on his personal life. That spring, he asked Camille to marry him. After nearly 4 years together, and with a 3-year-old son in tow, Camille Dancieux and Claude Monet were married in a small civil ceremony on June 28, 1870. He took Camille and Jean on a working honeymoon to the resort town of Trouville. There, Monet painted his new bride on the beach. Everything seemed bathed in a bright wash of sunlight and air. Monet's paintings reflected none of his worry over money or disappointment over his lack of recognition. Out of his group of artist friends, Monet had been the only one to be refused by the Salon. But he wasn't the only one traumatized by the jury. Morisot was upset by the acceptance of one of her submissions, Portrait of the Artist's Mother and Sister. After completing the painting, Morisot wondered whether it was good enough to go to the Salon. So she asked for Manet's opinion, a request she would immediately regret.
Manet said it was fine except the bottom of the dress. He took the brushes, added a few accents that looked quite good. Then began my woes. Once he had started, nothing could stop him. He made 1,000 jokes, laughed like a madman, gave me the palette, took it back again, and finally by 5 p.m. he had made the prettiest caricature possible. People were waiting to take it away. My only hope is to be rejected. Berthe.
Morisot was devastated. First of all, she worried that the picture was no longer really hers. But then also, that concern just exacerbated the one she'd had before, which is that she thought it wasn't a good enough picture to go to the Salon. And she wrote to her mother, "I'd rather be at the bottom of a river than have that picture shown."
But Morisot soon forgave Manet for touching up her work. To Morisot, Edouard Manet was a lifeline to the art world. At her mother's Tuesday night dinners, Morisot was able to get updates on the conversations that took place at the Café Gerbois. Conversations that she, as a proper upper-class woman, was unable to join.
One of the things that's very difficult to understand about Morisot is how she could keep a pace with these young men who were having these lively discussions in the cafes. And so we have to believe that at these family dinner parties, Morisot was, if not showing her pictures to her new friends or looking at their pictures, that at least they were talking about painting and painting theory. And I always imagine this scene where to the left and to the right people are talking about the weather, the latest play, and meanwhile, unbeknownst to everyone at the table, Impressionism is happening right there.
But Impressionism was suddenly put on hold. On July 19, 1870, the Emperor of France, Napoleon III, declared war on Prussia. And all of France was thrown into turmoil. Frederic Bazille was one of the first to answer the nationwide call to arms. He could easily have bought himself out of service, but instead he joined the infantry. As soon as Renoir learned that Bazille enlisted, he fired off a one-line note. "Triple shit," he wrote. "You are a stark, raving bastard." Bazille was sent to Algeria for combat training, but he seemed to think more about art than war.
Dearest Mother, I wouldn't be at all disappointed at seeing a real Arab village. I haven't seen a single palm tree, The Arabs are all poor and filthy. However, there's plenty here that would make for really lovely paintings. Frederic.
On September 2nd, in a battle on the Prussian border, the French army was routed. Emperor Napoleon III was forced to surrender. Napoleon had completely underestimated the strength of the Prussian army. In Paris, a new government quickly formed and sent out a call for all able-bodied men to join the National Guard. The Prussians were marching toward Paris. Monet, not interested in putting himself at risk for Napoleon's folly, got on a boat at Le Havre and fled to London. His wife and son would soon follow. Degas and Manet enlisted. They were both assigned to serve in the artillery corps. Renoir was drafted and posted to a regiment of cuirassiers, the armored cavalry. Pissarro and his family were forced to abandon their home to escape the oncoming Prussian troops. They fled to a friend's country house, then made their way on to London to wait out the remainder of the war. Basile finished his training in Algeria, and by late fall, he joined an infantry regiment near Fontainebleau Forest. He wrote to his parents, trying to calm their fears. "I am sure not to get killed," he said. "I have too many things to do in this life." Within days of sending the letter, Basile's regiment was caught by the advancing Prussians, and he found himself in the midst of his first battle. It would be his last. 2 bullets ripped through his stomach, and on November 28, 1870, Frederic Basile died. He was just 29 years old. The fighting was later described as a minor skirmish. It had no impact on the outcome of the war. Basile's father spent 8 days searching the battlefield for his dead son. Finally, he found him in an unmarked grave and brought him home for a proper burial in Montpellier.
When the news reached artists like Monet and Renoir, who were good friends of Basile's, that he had died, it was a moment of great sadness. He was one of their best friends. He was clearly someone that they had hoped to go forward with after the Franco-Prussian War. He was part of the inner circle. He was a driving force in the Impressionist movement, a quiet but driving force, and he was suddenly gone.
The Prussians surrounded Paris and cut off supplies of firewood and food to the entire city.
January 1871. My dear Edma, we celebrated the birth of the new year in sadness and tears. The bombardment never stops. It is a sound that reverberates in your head night and day. What suffering, What dire need. It is heartrending. Bert's health is visibly affected. With all my love, your mother.
On January 28, 1871, France surrendered to Prussia, giving up Alsace-Lorraine and paying heavy reparations. But peace was not to last. Civil war broke out in early April. The backers of a left-wing Paris government, called the Paris Commune, fought street-to-street battles with the national government for control of the city. Before the Civil War ended late in May, tens of thousands of Parisians were killed, many of them over a few days that came to be known as the Semaine Sanglante, the Bloody Week.
Many people were shot very summarily. Many people were exiled. Manet and Degas, according to Berthe Morisot's mother, went through Paris at this time thinking this is the most terrible thing. Manet even drew a picture of one of these summary executions.
The sunny, vibrant, modern world that had been laid onto canvas by a handful of young artists seemed lost to cold and darkness and desperation. But out of the darkness would arise a new France and a new sense of opportunity. The small group of Impressionist painters felt the time was right to take on the French art establishment and to challenge the conservative art critics. Their fight was to make art on their own terms, to create art that captured the modern moment, to not only survive, but to succeed and to triumph.